intent in verse 1 of what's before you, and verse 6 deals with who is before you, and verse 3 and 7 was why it was before you. And so it's always wise. There's wisdom in not just blindly entering into a situation, but then there was more consideration in verse 2, not just of the intent of the other person, but the consideration of the individual. And so he said to put a knife to thy throat if thou be a man given to appetite. Well, you have to actually ask yourself, am I a man given to appetite? And you have to answer it honestly, or else it'll do you no good. And so you have to consider yourself and your own shortcomings. And so he was dealing with this. And then the key note is that the constraint is only on yourself. It's not on the other person. You cannot control the other person's actions. You can only control your own. And so while we might foresee some things from someone, we need to be very careful not to pre-treat people as if they have already done something. It's very important that we be careful not to, because we can wind up in trouble if we do. And so we got to be very, very careful for that. And then in the middle of all of that, you get verses 4 and 5 where he tells you, labor not to be rich. And we looked at that, and the reality of all of it is that there is a heart issue that Solomon is pointing out to his son. And the son is, you need to ask yourself really why it is that you want this from them and why you want to be rich. Remember, labor is good and riches in and of themselves are not bad, but laboring to be rich is problematic, and loving riches is definitely problematic and is the root of all evil. The Bible would say in the New Testament, right? The love of money is the root of all evil. And it is not money that is the evil, but rather the love of it that becomes the danger. And so I'm going over this just simply to remind you of the point of emphasis that Solomon is making is on the heart. It's the reason behind things and the consideration within some very practical areas as to why. And while we may not have the privilege of sitting with leaders and dignitaries and rulers and ever come across the need to put a knife to our throat because we're a man given to appetite, we should, however, consider that advertisement has a goal in mind, and that is to appeal to you. And there's a reason why it appeals to you, and you should examine that, and you should consider that. Why is it that I'm all of a sudden hungry now when I wouldn't have been hungry otherwise? Because of that commercial, right? And what is that? And then recognizing it to be able to put some constraints up in some weak points in your life. Do you understand if every time you see an ad on TV about food, you go to the pantry and eat a dozen Oreos, you have a higher likelihood of health issues related to weight? And you understand that if that's you, you should put some constraints in place to avoid that. You say, like what? I don't know. Let's not have the dozen Oreos around. That's a good place to start if you can't control it. And that's the idea that's mentioned here, putting a knife to thy throat, right? Like keeping you from doing something. And those type of constraints, you say, well, I don't have a problem with that. There's no advertisement for food that makes me want to do that. You understand there's some of you that see an advertisement for alcohol and your lips might start puckering. Or you might see an advertisement for a cigarette and go, man, I haven't smoked in years, but that makes me want a cigarette. And for others of us, those might not be the things that appeal to us, but you need to examine and consider self, the individual, and your own shortcomings, and put the constraints up that will help you in the areas that you are being tempted. And he's going to get into some very general things now throughout this chapter that I want to pick up on in verse 9, because I do believe that we'll get to the heart of the matter here in just a minute. But verse 9, he says this, speak not in the ears of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words. Remove not the old landmark, and enter not into the fields of the fatherless, for their Redeemer is mighty, and he shall plead their cause with thee. Apply thine heart unto instruction, and thine ears to the words of knowledge. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. My son, if thine heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice, even mine. Yea, my reins shall rejoice, when thy lips speak right things. Let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. For surely there is an end, and thine expectation shall not be cut off. I'm going to stop reading right there as a text and get into the verses, because there is a lot from verse 19 through 35 that correlate with the first 18 verses. And it's interesting how that is laid out this way. But nonetheless, in verse 9, I want you to see that the instruction that is being given is to value your words. Value your words. Notice what he said again. Speak not in the ears of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words. So in this, he is going to highlight a selectiveness in the hearer and the timing of your words. Can I tell you, you need to value your words and make them count. You ever come across the person who said, well, I just say my mind. I just speak whatever I want to speak and say whatever comes into my mind. Or if it comes in my mind, it's out my mouth. Can I tell you that you are devaluing your own words? You're devaluing yourself. And it is not every place and every person with which you have to, nor should you, speak. Here he told him to speak not in the ears of a fool. So the person, he said to be selective in the hearer. Speak not in the ears of a fool. But there's also an idea of a timing, and I'll look at that here in a minute. But we see this principle all throughout the book of Proverbs. Come back to chapter 9, if you would. Proverbs 9. And I want you to see that it is not wise to speak the words of wisdom at the wrong time to the wrong people. You say, yeah, but I'm wise, so they should listen. Well, if you are wise, you will withhold that wisdom from certain people in certain places. Do you understand that the necessity here is that we would be very selective in our speech as to who the person, the place, or the hearer and the timing? Notice Proverbs 9, look at verse 7, please. He that reproveth a scorner getteth to himself shame. Do you understand? You just opened your mouth, reprove a scorner, wrong person, and now you're receiving shame because of you opening your mouth. Well, why didn't I just be quiet? Yeah, good question. So notice he goes on and says, and he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot. So be selective in the person. In our passage, it's a fool. Here it's a scorner and a wicked man. But then look at verse 8. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. You understand? It's not the rebuke that's the issue. It's the person that is being rebuked. And so can you see that the wisdom is not just knowing what to say, but it is found in knowing when to say it and to whom it is spoken. And so be selective in the hearer and in the timing. Look at Proverbs 25. Come to the other side of our chapter and notice these verses, please. Proverbs 25, look at verse 12. Or back up, to verse 11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. As an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. A lot of times we get so focused on what we have to say that we don't consider whether or not you can receive it. We're more worried about being a wise reprover, right? Well, I've got something to say. Yeah, but now's not the time to say it. Do you understand in your marriage it's very valuable when you learn now's not the time to say this? It's valuable. Yeah, but I'm right. You can be right and wrong. And right in what you say, but wrong in when you say it is just as wrong in both. So you need to be very selective. Notice he said a word fitly spoken. Fitly spoken. That is the right place at the right time, so that way it can be received in the right manner. A word that is fitly spoken is beautiful. And he goes on to paint an ornamental picture. Would you agree? He highlights it. But then in verse 12, he says that it's like a wise reprover, and notice this, upon an obedient ear. A wise reprover upon an obedient ear. What do you mean? Well, you might ask for advice and receive it, but if you don't obey it, should you expect more advice? Listen, it's foolish to just constantly spend time giving advice to people who don't receive it. You understand that's foolish? You say, no, you have wisdom, you're supposed to give it. Why on earth would it be that you expect a person who is wise to not have enough wisdom to stop giving you advice? So what does that mean? Well, you ought to value your words. You ought to value your words. Not just in selection of hearer or timing. Look at chapter 26 and verse 4. You know these two verses. Verse 4 says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly." And he goes on to tell you why, lest thou also be like him unto him. But then he says in verse 5, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit." So what's the difference between those two? The answer there is timing. There's a time to answer not a fool according to his folly. And then there's a time to answer a fool according to his folly. And it's not up to the fool to figure out when that is. It's up to the wisdom of the person speaking. Do you understand that it's not always time to point out what someone does wrong? It's not always time. A coach, after a game, doesn't immediately lay into everything that his players did wrong. Do you understand? A lot of times a coach will come in after the game and say, "Okay, guys, that was a tough one tonight, wasn't it? Let's meet up tomorrow and we'll go over the film." And then the next day, he might point out every single thing that every single person did wrong. But right after, when the emotions were raw, wasn't the time. You ought to have some wisdom and value your words. We do not value our words in our society. It's why we couldn't communicate in 140 characters and needed all the social media people to extend how much we could talk. Because we think that there is value in much speaking. But we know that to be untrue, which is what Matthew 6 says. The heathen think that they will be heard for their much speaking. Do you understand that, which we'll get into here in a minute, but do you understand that the more you talk, the less you have to say? If you're just constantly running your mouth, you lose the value of your words. Parents, let me encourage you in this manner. You shouldn't just constantly tell your kids the same things. Why? Your words are more valuable than that. And if you don't place the value on your words, your children will not either. And so if you tell your kids 55 times, clean up those toys. Now clean up those toys. Come on now, let's clean up those toys. Let's clean those toys up. We're going to clean up these toys now, right? Let's clean up these toys. You know what you're teaching them? My words mean nothing. They mean nothing. Why? Because I'm just constantly using them. We remember a generation where Dad only said things once. And you know why he only said things once? Because he valued his words. And so did you. Dad said it. Let's go. Why? It was weighted. It mattered. And there's wisdom to that. You say, well, that's because I wouldn't have. You mean like verses 13 and 14, right? Or 14 and 15, whichever ones they are. Like withhold not correction and all that. Yeah, you place value on your words. Did I say this? Yes. I shouldn't have to say it twice. Why? My word matters more in your life than that. You do not get to, as my child, dismiss what I say. Now listen, as a pastor, every single one of these relationships is volunteer. Right? You understand that? You're not here by force. But please consider that I value my words more than that. What do you mean? I mean, every time you mess up, we're going to come and help you. But I'm not going to chase you out down the street saying, you're going to mess up, you're doing wrong, Why? I've already told you. And you know better. And you know what is right. So you're not going to hear it from me. You're doing wrong. You don't need me to tell you that. Why? We have the Word of God, and you know you're doing wrong. Why would I come in and just waste my words on someone who is not an obedient hearer? You say, no, you need to come tell me I'm wrong. Don't you already know? Why do I need to tell you? Oh, watch, so it validates what you know. I don't need to do that. That's not my role as a pastor. And what it does is it actually devalues me just coming around all the time telling you, you're not doing right, you're not doing right, you're not doing right, you're not doing right, you're not doing right. You just learn to tune it out, don't you? Now, not only being selective in hearing and the timing and those things, but then value your words and make them count. And I'm not going to go any further into the New Testament tonight. I'm going to change my direction here, but even in substance. Hey, listen, if you have something to say, or let me say it this way, either have something to say or say nothing. We are a society that loves small talk. You can spend an hour talking about nothing. Oh, what do you think of the weather? Oh, it changes around here, doesn't it? Yeah, it's like every 10 minutes, it's a whole different climate. Ha ha, back where I'm from, they always said, and you hear these same conversations all the time, don't you? You know what it does? It devalues your words. You understand you're going to give an account for every, let that sink in, every idle word. Every. So you should value them. What do you mean? If you're going to give an account for them, make them count. Have something to say. It's always interesting in a room when the quiet person speaks, isn't it? Because oftentimes, Brother Gil, we've seen it, and you've probably seen it, I don't know how many more times than I could have, but you'll see it where a group of people are having a discussion, and there's typically an older gentleman off to the side. And after the young people have all given their opinion as to what they know to be right, and nobody can agree on anything, there's no consensus. Typically, things have gotten elevated and maybe have calmed down, and there seems to be a lull. Then, and typically only then, The quiet gentleman from the corner will say, his peace. And everybody else is just like, why didn't I think of that? You go, yep, that's right. You know why? Because when he had something to say, he spoke up. He said it. But listen, do you understand how much more value you will gain in your words to other people if when you don't have something to say, you don't say anything? Because when you start speaking, they go, ooh, something's coming. But instead, what we do is we train people, I'm going to open my mouth and there's not going to be anything pouring out of it. And so if we find something of value in what you say, it's almost like you had to get there by accident. Instead of knowing, oh, something good's coming. Why? Sister so-and-so is fixing to speak. Brother so-and-so is about, let me listen. Value your words. So in the area of selecting, in the area of substance, have something to say or say nothing at all. You understand, a lot of times your silence is wiser than our speech to begin with. But then also the idea of saturation. And this is what I mean. Come back to Proverbs 17. He that hath knowledge spareth his words. A man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. And we know the context and we've dealt with it, but consider a couple verses over in chapter 19, verse 13. So Proverbs 19, verse 13, the Bible says, a foolish son is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. All right, and then there's a follow-up verse to that in Proverbs 27, verse 15. Proverbs 27, verse 15. A continual dropping in a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. Do you understand, if everything's dead quiet in here and you just hear a drip, 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 that'll drive you crazy, won't it? I mean, if you just have one drip, it's like you got to find that drip. Why? It's driving me nuts. But if you let a downpour, a very rainy day happen, where you're hearing the rain hit the metal roof, and it sounds like thunder in here, you don't hear the drip anymore, do you? Do you know why? Because there's an oversaturation keeps you from hearing. And you need to value your words in this area of saturation, because if you just oversaturate something, you devalue it. All right, think of the word precious. You know why we call them precious metals? There's scarcity. Do you understand that if you flood the market with a product that is greater than the demand, or greater than supply, if you flood the market and reduce the demand, then your valuation goes down. So, as our government is printing money, the value of our dollar is diminishing. You know why? We're oversaturating the market with money. It's bloating the market, and boy, doesn't it look good. No, your bank account tells you it doesn't look good. Your way of life tells you, boy, this doesn't look good. When milk is costing $5 a gallon, it doesn't look good. And when everything else, eggs are $8 for, you know what I mean? You go, ouch, this hurts. This hurts. It's the same way with our words. When we constantly just spill out of our mouths all day, Every day, we are devaluing our words. And so the wisdom of Solomon, by the way, a wise man that people came from near and far to hear his words. He says, speak not in the ears of a fool. Why? Selection matters. Knowing who to speak to, how to speak to them, and when to speak matters. But then also, when you speak, have something to say. There was an old preacher in the West Virginia area. His name was B.R. Lakin. And B.R. Lakin has this quote, preach not because you have to say something, but because you have something to say. And there is a lot of wisdom in that phrase. Preach not because you have to say something. Do you understand? Just getting up here because it's church time and going through the motions is a futile experience. It would be wiser if you have nothing to say to go, I got nothing this week, let's pray, than to waste our time with no substance. What do you think about that? I don't know. So I'm not going to give you my opinion on something I don't know. Why? Why waste my value speaking about things I don't know about? I'm not going to waste my time with that. I don't know. Brother Gill, I have no idea if a 10-speed transmission is better than a 4 in the floor. I know someone who does. You know what? Hey, listen, I'm going to listen to her about that a whole lot more than you should ask me. I was always taught growing up it's better to have a manual transmission. The automatic transmission nowadays are superior in their capabilities. They happen quickly. Do you understand? You say, what makes that different? You're outside my pay grade. I don't know. You ever met the person who always had to put his 2 cents in on every subject? That's not revealing your wisdom. It's revealing your foolishness. Because if you were wise, you'd be more selective in the information you're giving. When something is out of place, or when something is oversaturated, it devalues it. Devalues it. Many products, and I'm going to move forward, many products have had an initial attempt at the market, a run at making money, and it wasn't the right fit. Whether they were advertising for the wrong people, or the application of the product wasn't what that was intended for. Like, for instance, do you understand WD-40 wasn't designed to be on everything to keep it from squeaking? But the application, the out of place, when it finds the right place, it produces great value. All of a sudden, this thing that was in the private sector, right, with very little traction, finds a niche in call it the defense sector. And boy, it's a specific application, and that thing makes the millions of dollars. Why? Because now it's in its right place. So like this, a word fitly spoken. What do you mean? Out of place, like making sure it's in its right place. You could say something profoundly wise in a nursery and it produce no effect. Why? Out of place. Out of place. The nursery is not the place to go try out your little nuggets of wisdom and see what the reaction is. The reaction is probably going to be throw up and, crying. Why? It's the nursery. So out of place and oversaturation devalue something. That's just in the marketplace. But your words, they act the same way. So consider the value of your words. I'm not going to get all the way, so come back to Proverbs 23. I'll give you the next two, and we're going to stop. The next one is verse 10. Not only is it, speak not in the ears of a fool, for he'll despise the wisdom of thy words. But then verse 10, he says, remove not the old landmark, and enter not into the fields of the fatherless. Because we've already hit this principle at the end of the last chapter, let me just say, not just value your words, but value what's been established. Value what has already been established. Don't destroy something, seek to build upon it. It is foolish to try to reinvent the wheel. There's no need for you to figure out the wheel, but you can improve upon the wheel. You understand that there are a lot of people who approach Christianity like, well, I don't like this or I don't like that, so let's tear it down and rebuild it. No. You are foolish if you are going to try to rebuild something, reinvent something, when God has given us the blueprint and He knows how it works best. So do not undervalue. So learn to value your words, but also learn to value what's already established. Learn to value what the older generation has done. Don't just seek to diminish, devalue, or get rid of it. It's foolish to do so. A lot of young people devalue the wisdom of the farmer. That's a problem. It's a problem. Don't diminish or devalue what's already been established. Do you understand that when we moved here in 2012 to start Trinity Baptist Church, we learned very quickly that when you're starting a church and it's just you and your family and you're trying to get people to come in, if you don't pray, no one has prayed for church. You understand that's just kind of how it works by virtue of being the first. If you didn't pray, nobody prayed. Then, I guess it's been 6 years ago now, or almost, my goodness, has it really been that long? 6 years ago, October? 6 years ago, coming in October. Whichever one it is, either last October or this October, will have been 6 years that our church, Trinity Baptist Church, has been merged together with Bible Baptist Church, which was right here and has been here for 40 plus years. And so what we started in 2012 has now merged together, and our history is much greater and longer than 2012. You know what that means? Please get this. That means this, that there are 40 years worth of people praying that predates me. You understand that when I started our church, if I didn't pray, nobody had prayed. But now we get in on that Miss Verna, Miss Virgie, her husband passed away like here, like right here, praying and begging God to bring up some young people in this place. Look around. Brother Joe had a heart and praying for God to bring young people to this church. And you understand, there are young people here, you say, oh, you've been praying for that. Yes, we have for 12 years now. But you understand there's 40 years now of people praying for this that we get in on. And it's not a lesser thing, it's a blessing to us. That we have the privilege to be a part of something bigger than us. We don't try to diminish that or to tear it down, but rather to build upon that. That's the heart. So be very careful, not just diminishing. What do they know anyway? What do those old people know? Probably more than you. You should listen. All right, verse 11. I'm going to stop here for time's sake. For their Redeemer is mighty. It's a continuation of the former verse. Remove not the old landmark and enter not into the fields of the fatherless. For their Redeemer is mighty. He shall plead their cause with thee. You understand, if God's pleading their cause against you, you lose that cause. Now, in this, you are encouraged, not only in verse 9, value your words. Verse 10, value what's been established. And consider the idea behind a king in his kingdom, passing it along to his son, and the value of being a part of a lineage and not just something new. Can you consider that, the value that's there? Don't just move it because you're the king and you can say it's moved. Appreciate that there is history involved. When you talk to people, do you ever consider their history? It matters. But then in verse 11, he says, for their Redeemer is mighty. So I want you not just to value your words and value what's been established, but now there is the way that starts. And that would indicate that you need to value your neighbor. Value your neighbor. You say, why? Well, in verse 10, he said to enter not into the fields of the fatherless. So these are those that maybe don't have anybody to teach them their history. Maybe don't have those that can instruct them, and you might be easy to take advantage of them because of their situation. And the Lord said that He would plead their cause. And so in this, we need to recognize, value your neighbor, don't mistreat them. Now, there's two reasons why, and I'm just going to give them to you tonight because of time. The first is, don't value you over them. Well, I can take this for me. Isn't that a good thing? So you increase, but they decrease. Here's the question. Why should you have it and not them? Do you understand? In order to get, that is the principle behind individual liberty. That's the principle behind it. Like, it's one of the hallmarks of our country, as well as our faith, individual soul liberty. Do you realize that you do not matter more than your neighbor? Now, what happens when your neighbor doesn't like you? Or is mean or unkind or unpleasant? What that means is you do not matter more than your neighbor. Why? This is key. God is who establishes value to the individual. Notice what it said, verse 11. The Lord, for their Redeemer is mighty. He shall plead their cause with thee. Do you understand why they're not more valuable? Is because their Redeemer is your Redeemer. Why you're not more valuable than them is because it's the same God. And the God who paid the price, Redeemer, to buy back, Redeemer, the God who paid the price for you paid the same price for them. And in Christ there is equality. Do you understand the value of that? Here's what that means. Judah is my buddy, matters just as much as Brother Gil. Means that Miss Jen matters just as much as Brother Tim. Means that Greg matters just as much as Drew. Means that Miss Mia matters just as much as Miss Mandy. You say, yeah, but I don't get along with so-and-so. They have as much value as you. So be careful not to mistreat them. Why? Learn to value your neighbor. Because God is the one who establishes our value. Now, here is a big key understanding, and I'm not going to get into it tonight, but you should meditate upon the value with which God has placed upon you. You need to consider that God has said you're valuable. Say, oh, I'm just the middle child. Yep, look up here. You're valuable. You say, well, I'm the firstborn. Of course I'm valuable. You're no more valuable than the youngest. If you're the baby, you think you're the most valuable. Guess what? You're no more valuable than your neighbor. Watch. That should get rid of. That would eradicate this thought process. So-and-so's in my seat. Do you understand that they have as much right to that seat as you do? Why? Because they matter as much as you. Well, they're in my parking spot. Who gave you more value than them? You can't park next or behind or around the back. Well, no, because that inconveniences me. And don't you know how much So verse 9, he's going to give him some things, and it comes from the heart. That's why we started there, going back over what we've looked at, and it's having the right heart about things, and it's learning to place proper value in some areas. Now, come with me to Proverbs 31. We'll be done. Proverbs 31. This is a verse that actually really helped me. Proverbs 31, look at verse 18. Talking about the virtuous woman. Verse 17 says, she girded her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. She's a bodybuilder. No, I'm just kidding. Verse 18, she perceiveth that her merchandise is good. How many of you have ever done something and went, oh, I'm not very good at it? You ever looked at what you've done and deemed it to be less valuable than even what other people ascribe it to? So what do you mean? You might play the piano and everybody tell you, man, you did a great job, and you go, oh, it was terrible. And here's what we'll do, Brother Tim, we'll call it humility. But there's a problem with that. Because undervaluing something isn't humility. Because it's an untruth. And the virtuous woman recognized the value of her merchandise. She said, her merchandise is good. Can I tell you that knowing your worth is important? Now, that's not being arrogant, but she perceiveth that her merchandise is good. She was able to look at the work of her hands and say, this has value. There's nothing wrong with that at all. You need to learn to value your words. Hey, my words value too much for me to waste them. I'm going to give account for them. They better count. So I'm not just going to waste them on frivolous things. But what's been established, there's value to it. It matters. And learning to value those things is important. You understand that even the lost world recognizes the value of going to church? Realize that people that attended church through COVID handled the COVID thing better than people who didn't? Isn't that a coincidence? No, they said, man, their mental is better. And the structure of traditional church is better. They said that does something for you. Understand there are studies about it, trying to figure out what it is. You're never going to study and figure out God. But there's value, learning to value the right things. Because when you learn to value your neighbor, it's not based on their position. These are fatherless. But their value becomes from being, not what they do. It's being them. And when we start looking at people as valuable because what they bring to the table, we've mistreat people. Hey, you can help me? You matter. You can't help me? You don't matter. That's how the world treats people. But with God, it's you matter. Why? Because He was willing to pay a price for you. And so we can look at our enemies and somebody who hates us and say, you know what? You matter. And you don't matter less than me. You matter. You ever wondered whether or not you mattered? Sure you have. Can I tell you tonight? You matter. When things aren't going well at home, kids, and you wonder, can I tell you, Jesus loved you enough to die for you? Kids, listen to me. You matter. I want you to know you matter to your pastor. You guys being here, it matters to me that you're here. You say, my mom makes me. I know how that goes. I was in a Christian home. It still matters to me that you're here. It's a blessing. You matter. You adults that are here, you matter. You came in from work, some of you not felt the, you matter. It's a blessing that you're here. And I value that, and I don't want to leave you with nothingness when you come. What do you mean? I mean, I ought to take the time to provide some substance. And you realize if you say, well, yeah, sure you should. You're the pastor. Okay, then the cashier that you talked to at Walmart today matters just as much and deserves for you to value your words. So be selective. I get a choice, right? I can be mean and grumpy, or I can be kind. So which one should it be? Well, when we figure that our neighbor matters, then we start implementing these things and going, you know what? I'm going to be kind. You understand how this connects? All right, I've got to stop. Let's stand to our feet.